Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and we're here with another episode looking into what's going on at the moment. And joining me is my founder-in-chief of the podcast, Councillor Richard Kemp from Liverpool. And we are delighted to be joined by a third leader, which is Rhys Taylor, the leader of the Cardiff LibDems. Welcome, Rhys, to the podcast.
Afternoon.
So we're going to talk a little bit about politics and what's going on at the moment, particularly in Wales, but also latest updates involving the virus as well. So, I mean, Rhys, you're our first, I think. Oh, no, I was going to say you're our first Welsh guest. You're not. We just had Jane Dodds, who's the leader of the Welsh Lib Dems. If I promoted you over, I'd get in all sorts of trouble. So, how's everything in Cardiff, Rhys?
Things in Cardiff, I mean, they're definitely looking better than they are across the border in terms of the virus. We're in a far stronger position in terms of schools returning, and I think people are feeling a lot more confident about how things are progressing in Wales. As a newly elected leader for a council group, a global health pandemic which shut down the economy and kicked a lot of public services into gear, it's been a bit of a learning curve.
So just to let viewers know that Rhys, you became a councillor and then straight away became the leader of a group. So that must have been fun.
Within 3 years, yeah. So I had a bit of time to settle in, but first term, I didn't think in my first term I'd be leader of a group. Let's put it that way.
How long were you leader before you became leader, Richard?
Of the Liverpool group, 30 years. But I was leader of all sorts of things in the meantime. I found it a damn sight easier to lead 4,500 councillors nationally, as we had when I started to become the leader of the LGA group, than the 62 we had in Liverpool at that time. But good luck to you. I do think we need more young people to do things. And I've no doubt that you do things, Rhys, differently than I would. And that's a good thing, because I know that there's an element in which people who've been doing it as long as I have are stuck in the past. It's difficult for us to change. And so I welcome young people. I used to think John Potter was young as a group leader, but...
the not quite squeezed middle is what I'm going for.
Your middle isn't squeezed, John, it must be so.
No, not at all. Not with lockdown.
Rhys, you have to be willing to give insults and take them if you're going to be on this podcast.
That's
right. That's fine.
I mean, it's interesting we talk about leadership, because what's coming on at the moment, and it's the first time really the press is going to, is where is Boris Johnson? Where is he? We've had an absolutely traumatic kind of 2 weeks involving the exam fiasco, everything. And it seems to be classic, this government at the moment, is if something happens, throw some civil servants in front of the camera and hide. And it's just great. I mean, can any of us think of ever doing that from a council point of view, where the lead politician would not be front and centre if an issue came up?
No, well, I'll tell you where he isn't. He ain't in a tent in Scotland, is he? Because they used an old photograph of him when he was still ugly and fat. Now he's just ugly. And a tent with nothing happening around it. And there's a luxury yacht just off the coast. They must think we're stupid. Well, quite a few people did vote for him, I suppose, so perhaps there's an element of truth in that.
Well, I just hope he's not walking in the Welsh hills, because I don't really fancy another election anytime.
No, that is true.
Let's hope he's not there.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're going to have a conversation with Kirsty Williams in the future about education, but we have to touch on the crisis that's happened in this last week. I mean, it has been. Can you imagine the government making a bigger foul up of this? But what's really interesting, we've just done an interview with Molly Nolan, who is our Scottish candidate for the Highlands next year for the Scottish Parliament, and the SNP made a complete and utter balls up of it. And then the government saw that and then decided, no, let's not learn from it. I mean, could they have handled this any worse, Westminster? Rhys, you can start on this.
Well, I think what the SNP did, from what I saw of it, was just lockdown. They refused to admit that there was a problem, and then later came forward with some solutions to what they were facing. And then Westminster just didn't seem to have even clocked that there was this backlash to what happened in Scotland. And I think we've faced a similar situation in Wales, where the algorithm didn't enjoy the confidence that that was hoped of it. But I think what Kirsty did was come out and say, look, this is what has happened. This is what we're going to do about it. These are some of the things we're going to do in the first instance to ameliorate some of the, what we know is going to be some of the negative impact of that on A-level results. And then she apologised, and the response to that, in comparison to what we've seen in Westminster, which has been very cold and very arrogant in how it's, responded to genuine concerns from young people, has been absolutely astonishing. But I think, it's just more of the same from the Conservatives, and it's more of the same from this brand of conservatism and Boris Johnson in particular.
Yes, I always think the most important thing you do if you make a mistake is apologise, because in some ways that always draws a line under it. Look, we made a mistake, particularly in these circumstances. No one's had to do anything like this before. We're struggling, we're doing our best. We failed in this way. People say, yeah, that's fair enough. But the trouble with the Westminster government is they've always tried to pretend they've got everything under control, even when it was quite clear that they hadn't. Again, if we go back to the testing, they were going to get up to 100,000, if I remember rightly, by the end of May. They only did that by fiddling the books. If they'd said, we've had a really good go at this and haven't quite made it, people have said, well done. Bung a load of stuff in the post, most of which didn't come back, and claim you've done it, makes them look stupid. So I think some people should have learned how to be better politicians than this. But I suspect if you're a Bullingdon boy, that won't occur to you, the element of humility. I think coming from over the border, that Kirsty has done well, but mistakes were made in Wales as elsewhere.
Yeah. But I think we're getting to a point now where this sort of thing really further knocks what little trust people have in politics and in politicians. And if you haven't got the guts, and if you haven't got the integrity to stand up and say, look, we got it wrong, and this is what we're not doing right, and this is what we need to do better, then I read, we've just had votes of 16-year-olds in Wales. If you don't give people a reason to believe that things can change and that politicians are human, we seem to forget that. But when you behave like you do in Westminster, where nothing seems to, it's like water off a duck's back, then we're not going to give people any reason to believe that things can change. And I think it's really damaging long term if we can't have those open and honest conversations of what we need to do better.
I'd be interested, sorry, John.
No, carry on, Richard, go on.
I'd be interested, just to leave aside the education thing, because we are going to discuss it with Kirsty on another occasion, just to look at the differences between the English system and the Welsh system of local government, and how you've been supported by the Welsh Parliament. And just to give you an idea, my own authority is something like £51 million adrift. And we were told by the Secretary of State that just get on with things, we'll watch your back, and that meant very clearly in financial terms, and they aren't doing. So the way that the government responded to the coronavirus and the aftermath and the effect on councils has been dreadful. What's your experience in Cardiff of the Welsh Assembly government?
Things have been far better, I think, in Wales. So Welsh government have stumped up around £500 million worth of funding for local government to replace in the main, additional costs on services in responding to COVID. So when you're looking, PPE on its own has been a massive cost, and particularly where, as Cardiff has done, Cardiff has set up its own supply chain separate to that's been offered through Public Health Wales and the NHS. So the Welsh Government has agreed to recoup those costs for councils. But what's really concerning for those councils that are massively dependent on income generation is that we have no idea what that means for the future. That's a massive hole in and of itself at the moment. But what does that mean in the future in terms of the borrowing that's already happening and the debt that councils already have? But the situation has been better in Wales, but in terms of the long-term picture, I think I really worry about what this means for frontline services. If there isn't some sort of national mechanism to get this, if UK government doesn't say, right, we're going to invest in public services and we're going to invest in our infrastructure and meaningfully spend on our economy, then I don't know what that means for things like social services and children's services that are already really massively squeezed.
And I think, I had an overview and scrutiny committee meeting with a finance cabinet member and the finance officers at Preston. And again, that statement, don't forget what the government said at the start of this, said to councils, do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes and we'll look after you. No council I know now thinks that the government is going to cover all their costs. It's just they just don't believe that's going to happen. That's regardless of what colour that council is. Councils are preparing to have a significant financial hit from COVID. Some, obviously, we've got coming down the road is the local government reorganisation as well, where someone say, well, if a whole load of councils start getting close to going bust and not being viable anymore, then it kind of leads the Tories to say, well, we're going to reform them anyway. We're going to do away with two-tier councils. Okay, not an issue probably for either of you two, because I used to are both kind of single-tier authorities. But for the double-tier authorities, then that's, it's very worrying, because you're trying to do a 5-year budget and not knowing, A, if you're going to exist in a couple of years, or B, what the actual full impact of COVID is going to be. It's an incredibly tough situation to be in.
Mm. But there has been talk about 3 years ago of reorganisation in Wales, because you've got some very small unitary councils there, which we wouldn't normally think could be effective. If I look along the North Wales coast, I think there are 6 along the coast, which are one constituency's worth. And how they can provide a full spread of services is actually beyond me.
Yeah, so local government in Wales, I don't remember the exact dates, but between the Welsh Parliament being established in 1999 and the current model that we have, local government has gone through reorganisation twice, I think, maybe, or maybe once before devolution and once after, and it's been discussed ever since. We've gone through 2 commissions looking at local government boundaries, but I think what we need to, in a way, 22 local authorities in Wales is probably too many. The problem is that we attach to that reducing the number of councillors, which I don't think is necessarily the right thing to do, and we probably wouldn't agree with that as Lib Dems. But what we forget, and what COVID has shown us actually, is that if we take organisational boundaries and organisational practice and procedures out of this, what you can deliver for people and deliver for communities. And I think if that's the conversation that we have, we're probably going to be in a better position. Like, okay, 22 doesn't work, but what are we trying to, let's start with a blank bit of paper rather than, as one minister did, just, draw some new lines on the map and say, hey, presto, here's what we've got that's going to deliver, the best local services that we can deliver. So I think we kind of need to start having a more nuanced conversation, which we always like to do as Lib Dems, but it's how we make that interesting to the public. Because I think I'm not too familiar with the discussions in England, but let's talk to people what they want from their public services and start from there. But at the moment, I think COVID gives us that opportunity, but it's whether the UK government is willing to take that.
Yeah, and perhaps the other thing that we could share is trying to do things from the bottom up rather than the top down as Lib Dems. How do community councils work? Because does everywhere have a community council? So, it's a bit like our town council system, that they're in some places, not others.
they're more prevalent in rural areas. So when I was in university in North Wales, most places had a town community council. They're less prevalent in urban areas. I don't have one in my ward, but in my constituency of Cardiff North, there are 3, I think, in the very north of the constituency. But it depends on geography, and there has been a tendency. I'm not too sure what it's like in England to shift some services to community councils. Some of that's been proactive, some of it's been reactive to what's cuts in local government.
And I think you're right. I think whatever happens, reorganisation is going to happen in England, and I think what will become a vital part of that from a local point of view is actually more neighbourhood, parish, community councils. Because you're right, because it's generally been leafy little villages. I think where they have their own little parish council. We set up the first kind of urban parish kind of neighbourhood council in Preston, and it does allow a level of flexibility that you don't get from boroughs and counties, and also it's hyper local, so it can deal with a particular planning issue, it can deal with a particular safety concern, or if it needed a new defibrillator at the local community centre. So these are vital. I think what Lib Dems will have to realise when the reorganisations come, because there will, like you say, Rhys, there'll be a lot of people going, oh my goodness, all these councillors or councils are going to get wiped out. Think proactively, okay, what can we keep or take from the boroughs and make even more local to help those residents? I think that's where Lib Dems are going to be, because as much as this is a personal opinion, I don't know what you guys think, I'm not sure local government reorganisation is going to be particularly high on the agenda of most voters. When we've got all this other stuff going on, if we become the party of anti-local government reorganisation, I don't think anyone's going to give two monkeys about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. But in a situation like in Liverpool, where the Labour-controlled council is becoming increasingly unpopular, you put it the other way around. Wouldn't it be nice if we in Allerton could run our own services and take some of them from those people in the town hall? So it's always how you express it. Devolution didn't work in England because it was expressed the wrong way, with a ridiculous question up in the northeast. But the more we relate to people's lived experience, we want to do more decision making near your street, your school, your this, your that, then people will be interested. But if you talk about devolution per se, certainly in England, no one gives a damn.
No. But it needs to have, I think the important thing is it needs to have teeth. Otherwise, it's another layer of government that doesn't work for people. And that was part of the frustration with the Welsh Parliament, the Welsh Assembly as it was in the first 2 terms. It had very little decision-making powers. It was tweaking things around the edges. And there was some innovative stuff that came from that. But it's only been the last 2 terms where it's had proper primary lawmaking powers. And we haven't got it right. Devolution has stopped in Cardiff Bay. There's a lot more to do to hand power to communities, but it can't be another layer of government that people say, oh well, you're just on the gravy train looking for an easy ride and for a name for yourself. And that's my concern when we look at layers. It's that it doesn't, as you said, Richard, respond to what people's experiences are of living in their communities.
When I'm challenged by people like the National Association of Local Councils, why don't you have one in Liverpool? And I am quite interested in doing this now. But I would say, they do have a parish councillor. It's me. And they do have a district councillor. That's me as well. Oh, and by the way, they have a county councillor, and that's me and my mates. So we look after, I don't know how big your wards are. We have 3 for 15,000 people, roughly 11,000 electors. And that's a lot of work to go into the grain of communities. And our ward is probably the wealthiest in Liverpool. So we don't have the day-to-day grind that I used to have when I represented a very poor inner city ward. So I would welcome, even if there was to be no change, something below me to deal with some of the day-to-day items, which I struggle with because I'm trying to look at the £1 billion budget.
I think that's, we will have another episode on local government reorganisation once the white paper comes out. But I think that's key, is at what level do you set it? So, my county seat has 6,500 households. So as opposed to my city seat, which is, about 4,000, just maybe a little bit less. And it's how then, at what size is it practical to be a group of 3 of you to manage something that big? Because if it's too big, you miss out, like you're saying, Richard, on the local bits. And if it's too small, it's inefficient. So, but like I said, we will discuss that on another podcast. But Rhys, I'm really interested in getting your perspective, because, like I said, we haven't had anyone on the podcast talking about Welsh Lib Dems at all yet, about where they feel, it's a sad time when we don't have a Lib Dem MP in Wales. So how are people in Wales feeling after the Thornhill review and the general election? Is there a sense that there's we're on the way up, or next year's elections? Are you thinking there's a good chance for gains? What's your take on Lib Dem life in Wales?
The big question. I think we went after the European elections, even though we didn't return an MEP in Wales, we had our highest ever vote share in those elections. And in some parts, in Cardiff in particular, we were by far, the largest, we were the lead party in the European elections in Cardiff. So that was a real boost for us. So going in 2019, there was some sense that we might be able to pull this off. We might be able to return something more than just the one that we gained, Jane, in the by-election. But Unite to Remain was a bloodbath. It was a really difficult time for the party. There was a special conference to determine what was going on with Unite to Remain, and there is still a lot of healing to be done off the back of that. And I think the comments that were made in the Thornhill report, and I was a member of the review panel, was that we've just seen a decade of decline in Wales. If you think of the problems that the federal party has, you can amplify that on a Welsh level. So I think the proportional electoral system in Wales gives us some hope that we can return a group to join Kirsty in the Senedd in May. But we have a lot of work to do, and given how polarising things are becoming with the independence debate, Plaid Cymru are growing in popularity. There are more people who would probably call themselves indie-curious, and turnout is lower in the Senedd election. So you have to think about those people who are engaged in questions like independence. Are they going to opt for a unionist party that's not Labour if they're centre left? So I think we have reasons to be optimistic, but we have one hell of a mountain to climb. And then we've got local government elections the year after. But there's lots going on in the party. We just need to make sure it's directed in the right way. And we have a new staff team coming on board, and we haven't had that. I remember I was a member of staff for the Welsh Party for a year after the last Senedd election, 2016, and that was tough. So it's nice now to have a proper team of staff in the party, and I think a lot of people are starting to feel that we are now moving forward. We aren't just thinking, what are we going to save? It's what steps can we take forward? But I don't think anybody's under any impression that it's going to be remotely easy the next 8-9 months.
What will happen to UKIP? I know one of their more moderate members, if you can have a moderate UKIP member, is now sitting as an independent. What's going to happen to them? Because you've got that absolute nut job, Neil Hamilton. Is he still the leader? I mean, I think they dance around their handbags in terms of the leadership, don't they?
Yeah, so there were 7 of them. There are now 2 as of last week, because Caroline Jones left them to sit as an independent because she doesn't believe she doesn't believe in abolishing the Welsh Assembly, which surprise, surprise, is something that UKIP believe in as well. But what we're seeing now is that the UKIP and Brexit vote will probably go in large part to abolish the Welsh Assembly. Now, the Abolished the Welsh Assembly Party polled above us in the North Wales region in 2016. And if the Brexit vote, if those voters are still motivated to go and vote as they were 2016, just before the referendum, then we're likely to see, for the first time ever, a group of people elected who are anti that establishment and are anti that government and that parliament. That poses some
So
problems.
I just want to say, this is absolutely fascinating to me because I have not, as like someone who doesn't follow Welsh politics particularly, I had no idea there was even a formal party against having a Welsh Parliament at all.
Neither did I.
That is complete news to me. And it's interesting you were talking about, and again, interesting you talk about independence, because again, we hear about Scottish independence, problems with Northern Ireland regarding Brexit, regarding Welsh independence. Again, it doesn't really cross the radar in England at all. And maybe this is where we should be a little bit concerned, because it didn't really cross much of the radar Scottish independence until the SNP swept across the board in 2015. That's really interesting. And I say, please go on. And so, what percentage of the population believe they want to get rid of the Welsh Parliament? What kind of polling does that say?
So it's mixed. There is not a majority of people who believe in getting rid of the Welsh Parliament, but what we have seen is a growing number of people who are who do not believe that Wales should have more powers. So there has been, since 1999, a growing number of people who've believed that we should have greater powers in Wales. We're seeing that slow down. So I think, I don't want to quote the numbers because they won't be right, but you are looking at a sizable chunk of people who of that polling sample believe that the Welsh Assembly, the Welsh Parliament, should be abolished, and that's, in some ways in line with the growing number of people who are in support of independence, with both of which have stemmed from the Brexit referendum. So we don't talk about Welsh independence so much, perhaps outside of Wales, because we, in comparison to Scotland, the debate is far further behind, and we don't have the same, institutions that Scotland would have to fall back on. But it is growing in popularity, and we're being, in terms of our prospects for next year, we're being squeezed in the middle, because we're federalists, so we can't explain to people what federalism means, and we're not anti the Welsh Parliament. So, with some of this mushy middle, as we always end up being, and that,
is it a big issue? Is it high on the agenda for people?
I wouldn't say. As I mentioned earlier, the problem we've got, or not the problem, part of the picture is that turnout for Welsh parliamentary elections are lower than they are for general elections. So for those people for who the constitutional issue is an important question for them, they turn out to vote. So at that point, that election brings with it a more high stakes in terms of constitutional issues. But it also suits Plaid to have that debate. And the Tories are moving further toward, they're trying to prevent, as Cameron did, that flow of people away from the Conservatives towards UKIP and Brexit. So it's always moving, and every poll says something different. But we are looking at a reduced Labour majority at the next election. So we are looking at coalition at the next election, whatever form that takes. But we do really, as a party, if we don't explain to people what federalism means, I worry about, where the country goes, and we get lost in that argument around, or that debate around independence.
So how's Starmer going down then in the valleys that gave Labour, along with the Scottish Steel areas, such a big UK majority? Do they think he's just another bloody Englishman, or do they see hope with him?
I think so. My seat of Cardiff North, the local party tried to deselect its sitting MP Anna McMorrin at the time, because she'd been critical of Corbyn. She stepped down from the front bench over Brexit, because there was such a momentum insurgence in the party. I'm not sure what that looks like in the valleys. I'm from the valleys, and my parents are from the valleys, and they will all tell you that people will just vote Labour. Now, what's interesting is that Labour lost one of their safest seats in the Rhondda in 2016. So I don't know. I think Starmer is probably going down far better than Corbyn did. I think people are happier to vote for a Labour Party with Starmer than they are with Corbyn. But I think for the vast majority of people, it is just, I have always voted Labour and I will continue to vote Labour. And that's.
But Labour can't take that for granted, though. Everywhere where Labour has taken that for granted since, like I say, Scotland's gone, vast swathes of the north have gone, vast swathes of the Midlands have gone. Now, if Labour suddenly start thinking that, then the worry is, that something else fills that vacuum. And, in the Northwest, me and Richard will know, Labour vote collapsed, we suddenly had a BNP MEP. Labour vote collapsed in Burnley, we suddenly had a whole load of BNP councillors in Burnley. And it was only the Lib Dems that who stood up in those points and said, this isn't happening in our towns. And we got out and changed that. So that's, I suppose, sometimes it can be because when, like me and Richard do, we face against Labour a lot, and so do you actually, Rhys as well. It can be very easy to see when Labour have been punching us repeatedly and attacking us for so many years to have a little bit of joy at their collapse. However, it has to be a collapse followed by Lib Dems taking those seats, otherwise something worse might come.
It's interesting that in Liverpool, the Labour Party are still spending more time fighting each other than they are fighting the Tory government. So this week, a Labour councillor has been suspended for a year. Something to do, I didn't quite understand it, but something atrocious about Palestine and Judaism, which is something that he regularly goes on about, so I didn't listen. But you watch the Twitter accounts. There's a Labour councillor, I can't think of the exact terms, but basically describing Starmer as a slimy, brill-creamed git or something like that, but really abusive language, which if a Lib Dem councillor was doing it, about anyone, never mind our own leader, we would take action about, but nothing seems to happen because of the constituency that she's in. But general impression is that, as I predicted, John, some time ago, that what would happen with Momentum would happen with Militant.
Yeah.
They come, they flourish, they scatter around, scurry around, and then 4 years later they get fed up and disappear.
Yeah. Keyboard warriors and.
Yeah, is that happening in Preston?
We've never really had massive momentum base in Preston because the Preston Labour Party is so left-wing anyway. They haven't felt the need to come in. But even that, Preston Labour's, like I say, is very left-wing, voted for Rebecca Long-Bailey to be leader and all the rest of it. So they are on that wing anyway. But I'm from an active, Preston, I always have to remember and remind a lot of Lib Dems is that most local politics is actually fairly weak. When you see these absolute slobber knocker kind of fights going on, that tends to be in just a few areas. For the most part, it is, a couple of teams of people and going at each other, that's it, rather than actually some all-out kind of waves. And, and that's why we say to Lib Dems watching this podcast, if you have 5 or 6 people who are dedicated to winning a ward and doing it, you can make a huge difference in a city or win your first area just with a small handful of people, because actually you don't get that much resistance. So, and just to end this point, the seat we took off the Tories for the first time in 40 years last year, they have yet to put out a leaflet in 14 months since we took a ward off them. And unfortunately, that's the level of some of oppositions we get in some parts of the country.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say that it would be totally irresponsible for any Liberal Democrat to put out provocative tweets to keep stirring the flames inside the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
Absolutely condemned.
But with that, I'll say this is, like I say, our latest news update. I want to thank you, Rhys, for coming on. Are you okay to come on again in the future, Rhys? Would that be all right? You are now our Welsh spokesman on the Lib Dem Pod. So it's been great catching up. Thank you to everyone who listens. We really appreciate it. We're very grateful, all of you that tune in, both on YouTube, Facebook, or through your podcast providers. You can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at Lib Dem Pod. My name is John Potter. That was Richard Kemp. That was Rhys Taylor. Thank you so much for listening, and we're back with another episode very soon.